I've never liked living alone. I told myself I did. I mean, who doesn't want their own space, right? No roommates leaving dishes in the sink. No one stealing your leftovers. Just peace. Quiet. But the quiet gets heavy sometimes. Too heavy. The apartment isn't big, just a one-bedroom on the third floor of this old building downtown. You can hear everything through the walls. Pipes groan. Neighbors argue, laugh, slam doors. For a while, I found it comforting. Like proof I wasn't completely alone. That changed a few weeks ago. It started small. I'd come home from work and find little things out of place. A cup I didn't remember using would be in the sink. My keys, which I always leave on the counter, would be on the hall table instead. I blamed myself. Long hours. Stress. Everyone forgets things. Then I started noticing the closet. I don't use it much, just coats, some old boxes, a vacuum. But I kept finding the door cracked open. Not wide, just barely ajar. Like someone had opened it carefully and left it like that on purpose. I thought maybe it wasn't latching properly, so I checked. It was fine. Still, every morning it was closed, and by the time I got home, there it was again. That narrow sliver of darkness waiting for me. I asked my super if someone had a spare key. He said no. I changed the locks anyway. The next week, I woke up to footsteps above me. Slow, deliberate. Just after 2 a.m. I stared at the ceiling, heart thudding, waiting for them to stop. Thing is, I'm on the top floor. There's no one above me. I tried telling myself it was the building settling. Or a raccoon on the roof. Something. Anything. But it didn't stop. I started staying late at work. I'd make excuses to hang out with coworkers, linger at the office. But when I finally did come home, I'd walk in and feel watched. That's the only way to explain it. Not scared, not really, just this low, gnawing awareness. Like the air was thicker, like someone was holding their breath just out of sight. One night I got home and the light in the bathroom was on. I never leave it on. I went in and the mirror was fogged. Like someone had just taken a hot shower. But the room was cold. I stood there for maybe 10 seconds, just staring at myself in the mirror. I looked exhausted. Pale. My eyes looked wrong. Too wide. Too flat. Like I was already halfway gone and hadn't noticed. I started talking to myself. Not out loud, just in my head. Reassuring myself. You're tired. You're stressed. It's fine. Like a mantra. Then the dream started. Always the same. I'm in bed, awake, but I can't move. The closet door creaks open, slow and silent. Something crawls out, not fast, not aggressive, just fluid. Too long. Too quiet. And it stands there at the foot of my bed. Watching. I never see its face. I just know it's watching. I wake up soaked in sweat. Every time. One night, I dreamed I got out of bed. In the dream, I walked down the hall, past the kitchen, into the living room. The whole apartment felt wrong. Like the furniture was too tall. The ceiling too low. Everything slightly off kilter. And sitting on my couch with me. Just me. But the smile didn't belong to me. It was too wide. Like it had been carved on. And it didn't blink. I stood there frozen, and it said, "You're not the one who stayed." I woke up on the couch. I hadn't fallen asleep there. I know I hadn't. My phone was still on the nightstand in the bedroom. I had to walk back down the hall to get it. That whole walk, I couldn't shake the feeling I'd left something behind in the living room. Or maybe it had followed me out. I started locking the closet door. Bought one of those child-proof handles you have to squeeze a certain way. I checked it 3 times before bed every night. But every morning, it was open again. Not wide, just enough. Like a reminder. Last night, I left the light on in the hall. I don't even care about the electric bill anymore. I couldn't sleep. Just laid there staring at the ceiling. Then I heard it. Click. The closet handle. The faintest little click. I didn't move. Couldn't. My hands were cold. Breathing shallow. And then, I swear to God, I heard it whisper. Right by my ear. "You're still here." This morning, everything looked normal. Too normal. The closet was closed. Light was off. Mirror clear. Keys exactly where I left them. I almost convinced myself it was all in my head. Maybe I've had a breakdown. That would be a relief, honestly. But just now, I looked in the mirror again. And for a second, just 1 second, my reflection didn't move when I did. I never used to notice the sound the fridge makes. You know, that low hum it kicks on every so often? It's background noise, like traffic or your neighbor's dog barking. But now, I hear it. I hear everything. I live alone. Been that way for a couple years now, ever since Rachel moved out. She said I was withdrawing, like I was folding into myself. I guess that's fair. Things at work got weird. Not bad, just weird. I'm a graphic designer, freelance. Most of my clients are remote, and lately, every project seems to come from people I've never met, never even spoken to. Just emails with vague instructions, files with no metadata, logos for companies that don't seem to exist. I googled one of them, Ellard & Sons Industrial, and the only result was a grainy photo of an old warehouse with a tree growing through it. I figured it was just some kind of placeholder job. Agencies do that. They test you. But then I started getting more of them. Dozens. All with that same slightly off vibe. The designs they wanted were, I don't know how to put it, repetitive. Not the same image, but the same structure. Circles inside triangles. Numbers hidden in the background. One client asked me to use a specific shade of green, and when I opened the file they sent, it was just static. Like TV static. In PNG format. When I zoomed in, the pixels looked like tiny eyes. That's when I started losing sleep. I'd go to bed, lights out, but my brain wouldn't shut up. I kept thinking about the eyes. How they seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. I know that doesn't make sense. I know. But then things started happening around the apartment. I'd wake up and the kitchen light would be on. I always turn everything off before bed. I'm meticulous about it. I'd find the fridge door cracked open, cold air spilling out. I thought maybe I was just sleepwalking. Maybe stress was getting to me. But then I started hearing things. It started subtle. The creak of the floorboards in the hallway. The whisper of movement just beyond the bedroom door. But my building's old. Drafts, mice, you name it. I brushed it off. Then one night I was brushing my teeth and saw movement behind me in the mirror. Just a flicker. But it was there. I turned, of course. Nothing. But when I looked back, I swear the reflection was slower to follow. I dropped the toothbrush. Didn't even realize it until I stepped on it later. After that, I started keeping the lights on. Every light in the apartment. Slept on the couch with the TV playing old sitcoms just to drown out the silence. The laughter helped. For a while. Last week, someone knocked on my door at 3:13 a.m. sharp, deliberate knocks. 3 of them. I stood there on the other side, not moving, not breathing. I didn't answer. When I finally looked through the peephole, no one was there. But taped to the door was a single sheet of paper. No writing. Just that same triangle and circle pattern I'd seen in the client logos. I called the building manager the next day. Asked if security had picked up anything. He just stared at me for a second too long and said, "We don't have cameras on this floor." That's not true. I've seen them. There's one right above my door. I went back upstairs and it was gone. The camera. Just a small square of clean wall where it had been. Like it had never been there at all. I haven't left the apartment in 3 days. I tried calling Rachel. She didn't pick up, but I left a voicemail. I told her everything, probably too much. The eyes, the symbols, the static images. I said I didn't know what was real anymore. I begged her to call me back. That was 2 nights ago. Tonight, my phone rang. No caller ID. Just heavy breathing on the other end. And then, in my own voice, someone said, "You're almost ready." I dropped the phone. Didn't even hang up. I just let it fall to the floor. It's still down there, glowing. Right now, the fridge is humming again. But it's not the normal hum. It's lower. Like a voice trying to speak through it. I swear I can almost make out words. I'm scared to go over there. I'm scared to unplug it. I'm scared to do anything. My reflection doesn't match me anymore. It stands still when I move. I think I'm being watched. I think I've been watched for a long time. And I think, maybe, just maybe, it's almost time for whatever comes next. I don't usually work weekends, but Jen was out sick and I offered to cover her shift. It's a tiny insurance office wedged between a dry cleaner and a vape shop on 9th Street, nothing fancy. You wouldn't even notice it unless you were looking for it. One of those places with flickering overhead lights, fake plants in every corner, and that faint smell of printer toner and stale coffee that never quite goes away. I didn't mind being alone. It was quiet. Peaceful, even. Gave me time to catch up on the backlog. But Saturday felt off from the moment I stepped inside. For starters, the door was already unlocked when I got there. I figured maybe the cleaning crew had forgotten to lock it behind them. Happens. But when I got upstairs, everything looked untouched. Lights off. No sign anyone had been there. Still, I did a sweep, just in case. Closet, break room, even checked under the desks. Empty. I told myself not to be paranoid. By midday, I was halfway through filing when the phone rang. The landline. No one ever uses it, clients always call our direct lines. But it rang, loud and shrill in the dead silence. I picked up, and for a few seconds, no one said anything. Just a soft rustling, like someone moving paper. "Hello?" I said. "This is Carver Insurance." More silence. Then a whisper, "You left the door open." I froze. It didn't sound threatening. Just, wrong. The voice was quiet, but flat. Like it was being recited from memory. And it didn't sound like a man or a woman. Just a voice, stripped of anything human. I hung up. Locked the front door. Double-checked the windows. Tried to laugh it off. But I kept thinking about the voice. How certain it sounded. Like it knew. Around 3 o'clock, I went to the break room for coffee. The pot was empty, which was weird, because I hadn't made any. But the burner was warm. I stood there for a minute, hand hovering over the handle, just staring at it. Trying to remember if maybe I'd forgotten it. Maybe I'd brewed it earlier without thinking. But no, there was a clean filter in the trash. A full one. It was fresh. I didn't drink it. Back at my desk, I tried to focus. But I kept hearing things. Little things. A file cabinet clicking shut down the hall. The printer warming up for no reason. At one point, I heard someone typing in the next cubicle over, fast, rhythmic. But when I stood to check, no one was there. The screen was on, though. A blank email draft open. The to field just said me. That was when I decided to leave. I packed up fast, grabbed my bag, and practically ran to the elevator. I hit the button and waited. And waited. The floor indicator didn't move. I jabbed the button again, harder. Nothing. Then the light overhead flickered and turned off. I took the stairs. The whole building felt hollow. Not just empty, but like it had been gutted. Like the walls were thinner than they were supposed to be, and something was pressing up against them from the inside. I could hear it. A slow dragging sound. Faint, but steady. Like something being pulled across carpet. I didn't look back. I made it outside, into the noise of the city, and immediately felt stupid. It was bright, people were walking by, cars honking. Normal. Real. Still, I didn't sleep well that night. Sunday, I went back to grab the charger I'd left behind. Daylight. No reason to be nervous. The office was quiet again. Too quiet. I walked in, keeping my eyes straight ahead. My desk looked untouched, but there was a manila folder sitting right in the center. No label. Inside were photos. Black and white. Grainy. All of me. One was from last Tuesday. I was sitting at my desk, typing. Another was from Friday, at the copier. But the last one was different. It was from Saturday. I was standing in the break room, hand hovering over the coffee pot, staring. And behind me, just barely visible in the reflection on the microwave, was someone. Tall. Thin. Face blurred like a smudge on the lens. Not moving. Just watching. I don't go in on weekends anymore. I don't know when it started. Maybe it was the day I moved into the apartment, or maybe it was earlier, before I even knew it was happening. But now, every time I look at the walls, I feel like they're closing in. I know that sounds dramatic, but that's exactly how it feels. I'm not the type to freak out over small things, but lately, I've been wondering if I'm losing my mind. It's a tiny place, 1 bedroom, 2nd floor of an old building. Rent's cheap, but that's probably the only good thing about it. The landlord's this strange, silent woman named Mrs. Harris. She's never been friendly. She doesn't say much when we pass each other in the hallway. She just nods, like she's checking me off on some list. The building has that heavy, stale smell, dusty furniture, old carpet, the kind of place where you can't quite get the air to feel fresh. I work at a bookstore in the city, so I'm out most days. Not many friends, but I'm okay with it. I like being alone. I've always preferred it, really. But when I'm home, that's when the feeling starts. At first, it was just little things. The sound of footsteps in the hallway when I knew no one was there. The occasional shadow moving in the corner of my vision. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination. Old building. Old pipes. Things creak. You hear stuff. But then one day I came home to find the front door wide open. Not just cracked, open. I swear I locked it. I always lock it. I even checked the key when I was out. Still, there it was, hanging wide. I stepped inside, half expecting someone to be waiting for me. But the place was empty, exactly as I left it. I was going to call the landlord, but I don't know. It felt wrong. I couldn't bring myself to do it. Instead, I locked the door again, bolted it, and decided it was nothing more than a glitch in my brain. Stress from work, maybe. Lack of sleep. It was all fine, right? Except it wasn't. A few days later, I started noticing something on the walls. Small at first, just faint smudges, like someone had brushed their hand against the paint. I thought maybe it was dirt, or marks from the furniture. But then they started to spread, like ink bleeding through paper. I tried to wipe them off, but the marks wouldn't budge. It was almost like they were growing. No matter what I did, scrubbing, washing, it only seemed to get worse. And there was something about the pattern. Something wrong. It was subtle at first, just abstract shapes, but as the days passed, I realized the shapes started to form something. Letters. Words. I couldn't read them at first. It didn't make sense. But as I stared, the words began to make themselves clear. They were always in the same place, the corner above the couch. A few letters here, a few there, growing every time I left for work. When I came home, there'd be more. Get out. Not safe. We're watching. I tried to ignore it. I tried to convince myself I was losing it. That I was just seeing things. But the words didn't stop. And when I tried to repaint the walls, the same message appeared again, darker and clearer than before. It's like the walls were resisting the paint. Like they knew what I was doing. I started to leave notes for myself. Little reminders that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't imagining things. Just paint over it, I'd write. This will pass. But when I woke up the next day, the note would be gone, like it had never been there. And the words on the wall. They'd be there, always a little closer to something I couldn't quite grasp. Last night was the worst. I woke up at 3:30 a.m., the air in the room thick, heavy with the kind of silence that felt like it was pressing against my chest. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. It wasn't the air conditioning, my windows were shut. I don't know how long I lay there, just staring at the walls, feeling like I was being watched. Then I heard it. A whisper. At first, I thought it was just in my head. I had just woken up from a strange dream. But the whisper wasn't in my head. It was coming from the walls. You should leave. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. I just listened. And the whisper came again, closer this time. You have to leave. I bolted up, my heart racing, looking around the room like something was going to jump out at me. The walls were silent, just still. But the words on the wall were different now. They were all over the place. Every surface, every inch of space, covered in jagged, desperate letters. They weren't neat anymore, they were erratic. Like they were trying to crawl out of the walls. I backed up toward the door, my hands trembling. I couldn't take it anymore. I just had to leave. I had to leave. But when I opened the door, something stopped me. In the hallway, standing just outside my apartment, was Mrs. Harris. She wasn't standing still like she usually does. She was moving, slowly, watching me. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen, my body locked in place. She didn't say anything. She didn't move, except for her eyes. They were wide, too wide, and they didn't blink. She just kept looking at me, her lips barely parted. You're not supposed to be here, she whispered. Then she turned, and just like that, she was gone. She didn't walk. She didn't make a sound. She just vanished. I don't know what's real anymore. I don't know if I'm going crazy or if something's really wrong with this place. All I know is that the words on the wall aren't just words anymore. They're a warning. I moved to this town a few months ago, kind of on a whim. I needed a change, you know? The city was getting to be too much. Noise, traffic, the same faces every day. So I packed up my things, found a tiny house on the edge of town, and thought it'd be the perfect place to start fresh. At first, everything seemed fine. The house was old, creaky floors, chipped paint, the works, but it had charm. A big backyard that I'd never need to mow. I'd be in charge of the front yard, though, which was fine, and the neighbors were friendly in that way people are when they know nothing about you yet, but they're curious. The whole town was like that, quiet, peaceful, slow. Nothing to worry about. until the lights started flickering. I noticed it a few nights after I moved in. Nothing major at first. Just the occasional stutter when I'd turn the kitchen light on or off, and I'd think, maybe the bulb's going out. But then, a couple nights later, the flickering got more deliberate, like it was trying to tell me something. I'd be sitting on the couch, watching TV, and the light in the hallway would flash twice, then go dark for a few seconds. I'd get up, check the switch, nothing. Everything seemed fine. It wasn't just the lights, either. The front door handle started jiggling. At first, I chalked it up to the wind, but it was always happening in the middle of the night. That quiet time when nothing moves, and the house settles. I'd hear it, a soft rattling, as if someone was testing the lock. I'd get up, go to the door, look through the peephole, and there'd be no one there. No footprints in the dirt outside. Nothing. A few days later, I was at the diner, grabbing a coffee, and I mentioned it to the waitress, Linda. She laughed and said, "Old houses do that. You're just getting used to it." She had this smile on her face, like she was humoring me, but her eyes were, I don't know, maybe a little too wide. She quickly changed the subject, asked how I liked the house. I told her it was fine. The next night, I went out for a walk. I hadn't been around the town much, and I thought I'd explore a little. The streets were deserted, and the only sound was the crunch of gravel under my feet. But then I noticed something strange. As I walked, I started to hear footsteps behind me, matching my pace. At first, I thought it was someone else out for a walk too, but when I turned around, nothing. Just the empty road stretching out behind me. I tried to shake it off, kept walking, but the footsteps didn't stop. They followed me all the way back to my house. I even tried to stop and wait for whoever it was to catch up, but no one ever appeared. It wasn't until I got home that things really started to unravel. I went inside, locked the door behind me, and took a shower. When I came out, the lights were flickering again. And this time, they weren't just flickering, they were strobing. The hallway light was flashing like a warning, almost as if it was in sync with something. My heart raced, and I felt this overwhelming urge to look outside. I went to the window. There, standing at the end of my driveway, was a figure. Too far away to make out any details, but I could see the outline clearly. A tall figure, just standing there, watching. I froze. I don't know how long I stood there, but by the time I moved, the figure was gone. Like it had never been there. The next morning, I stopped by the hardware store. The owner, Bill, was behind the counter. I didn't want to sound crazy, but I asked him if anyone had ever reported strange happenings in the area. He gave me this odd look, like I'd asked a stupid question. "We don't get much trouble around here," he said. "But if you're hearing things, maybe the old houses. They do that sometimes. It's the quiet, I think." I couldn't tell if he was serious or just trying to brush me off. That night, I got home late, a little too late to be honest. I'd been out at the bar, having a few drinks, trying to distract myself from everything. But when I opened the front door, the air felt different. Heavy. The lights were flickering again. All of them. The hallway light, the kitchen light, even the lamp in the living room. And that sound, the rattling of the door handle, came again. I stood still, not daring to move. I thought maybe it was just my imagination, but then I heard it again, louder this time. A voice. Faint, but unmistakable. A whisper. "Come outside." I don't know why, but I opened the door. I didn't want to, not really. But I felt this pull, like something was guiding me, forcing me to step outside. I stood on the porch, looking out into the darkness. No one was there. The street was silent. But then I noticed something. At the far end of the yard, in the shadows near the trees, a figure was standing. Not at the end of the driveway this time. This figure was closer. It was watching me. I stepped back, but before I could close the door, the whisper came again. Louder this time. "Come closer." I slammed the door shut, locked it, and turned the deadbolt. I ran to the windows, pulling the blinds down. But when I looked out again, the figure wasn't there. It's been a few days since then. I don't know what to think anymore. I'm trying to tell myself it was just my nerves, just the isolation getting to me. But the lights are still flickering. The door handle still rattles. And last night, I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of footsteps outside my window. But when I pulled the curtain back, there was nothing. Except a single, perfect footprint in the dirt right in front of the window. And I could have sworn I saw it move. The first time I saw the dog, I thought it was just a stray. I was walking back from the coffee shop, half listening to a podcast on my phone, when it appeared on the sidewalk ahead of me. A small thing, mostly white with a patch of brown around its eye, looking like it belonged to someone, well-fed, clean, with no collar. I stepped around it, tried to keep walking, but it followed me. I didn't think much of it at the time. Maybe it had lost its owner. It wasn't the first stray I'd seen in the neighborhood, and it wouldn't be the last. But then the next day, there it was again. Same spot. Same sidewalk. Same expression. I'm a creature of habit. I walk the same route every morning. I could have sworn the dog wasn't there when I passed by earlier, but it was when I turned back down the street. I stopped, hesitated. The dog just looked at me with those wide, brown eyes. "Where's your owner, little guy?" I asked, half to myself. It didn't respond. It never did. Just stood there, tail wagging slightly, eyes following me like it was waiting for something. The third day was when things started to feel strange. I noticed it right when I stepped out of my apartment. The dog was sitting at the bottom of the stairs, staring up at me. The strange thing? I hadn't seen it in the building at all before. I'd been living there for 2 years, and I knew every neighbor. No one had a dog, not even a pet. This building doesn't allow them. I shrugged it off. Maybe it had wandered inside at some point. Maybe it belonged to someone in the area and just liked to hang around the entrance. Still, the way it looked at me, head tilted, was unsettling. I walked past it and into the street, but I kept an eye on it from the corner of my vision. It followed me again, just a few steps behind, keeping that same distance. It didn't bark. It didn't get too close. But I felt its presence, always there. The fourth day, it followed me all the way to work. I tried to ignore it, thinking that maybe I was just paranoid. It couldn't be following me, could it? Dogs don't have the attention span for that. But it wasn't like a normal dog. It didn't wag its tail like a happy dog. It didn't run ahead or look distracted. It just followed. Always at the same pace, never losing its place behind me. I turned corners, changed direction, but the dog was there. Every time I looked back, there it was, staring, unblinking. By the time I got to the office, I was shaken. I don't know why I felt so uneasy. It was just a dog, right? But there was something about its stillness, the way it didn't move like a normal animal. It seemed deliberate. When I went to lunch, I didn't see it at first. I thought maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. But as I came out of the deli, I saw it again, sitting on the curb, staring straight at me. It hadn't been there a second ago. How had it gotten there? That's when I started to wonder if I was losing my mind. If I was seeing things. If I'd started to imagine that dog. Maybe it was just a figment of my imagination. But then it came home with me again that night. I hadn't seen it since lunch, but when I turned the corner to my building, there it was. Sitting on the sidewalk, waiting. The same look on its face, like it had been there the whole time, watching me. I froze. I almost turned and went back, tried to take another route, but it was too late. It had already seen me. I could feel it, even though I wasn't looking directly at it. So, I walked to my door, trying to ignore the tightness in my chest, trying not to let my imagination get the best of me. The dog was still there when I got inside. I hadn't seen it leave. That night, I locked the door, checked the windows twice, and sat on the couch, phone in hand, scrolling aimlessly. I couldn't get the image of that dog out of my head. Its eyes were still staring at me. The next day, I didn't go outside. I tried to call a friend to talk about it, but no one picked up. I couldn't focus on anything. I paced around my apartment, making sure the windows were shut tight, the curtains drawn. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was out there. Watching. Waiting. Around 3 p.m., the knocking started. It was soft at first, like someone tapping lightly against the door. But then it grew louder, more insistent, rhythmic. Knock. 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 I jumped, frozen in place. My phone slipped out of my hands. I couldn't breathe. I wasn't expecting anyone. I waited, my heart thudding in my chest, praying it would stop. It did for a second. I almost thought it was over, but then it started again. Louder. Faster. Knock. 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 I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, just a lamp, something heavy, and slowly crept toward the door. I peered through the peephole, my breath caught in my throat. There was no one there. But I saw the dog. It was sitting on the other side of the door. Just sitting. It was facing me, staring through the peephole. Its eyes were wide, unblinking. The longer I looked, the more I could see the shadows around it moving, shifting. My mind scrambled. I had to leave. I needed to get out. But when I turned to grab my keys, the lights flickered. The dog was still there, staring at me through the crack in the door. I don't know when I stopped being able to move. Or when the knocking stopped. I don't know when I stopped hearing anything at all. But I swear I can still hear it. That faint tapping, just outside my window. And I swear I saw the dog's eyes blink. It started with a phone call. The kind you don't expect, especially on a Wednesday evening when you're winding down from a long day. I was sitting at my kitchen table, picking through a bowl of cereal and scrolling through my phone. I didn't recognize the number, but that's nothing new. The spam calls are relentless, so I almost didn't answer. But something about it made me pick up. Hello? There was silence for a moment, then a voice, low and gravelly, like it had been through too much, came through the receiver. Are you alone? I froze, the spoon halfway to my mouth. I was in the middle of chewing, but I stopped. Something about the way he said it, with that weird edge to his voice, made my stomach twist. Who is this? I asked, my voice sounding too loud in the stillness of the kitchen. A pause. Then the voice again, this time almost a whisper. You shouldn't be alone. I felt this cold rush crawl up my spine, the hairs on the back of my neck standing straight up. My heart started to beat harder, louder. My breath quickened. It was just a prank, I told myself. Just some weird, sick joke. But then the voice came again. He is coming. Before I could respond, the line went dead. The silence after was deafening, like the air itself had thickened. I stared at the phone for a moment, wondering if I'd imagined it. Was it just my tired mind playing tricks? I called the number back. The line rang once. Twice. Then a recording came on. This number is no longer in service. I hung up and sat there, staring at the phone in my hand. The strange thing? I couldn't shake the feeling that the voice had known something. Known that I was alone, that I lived by myself. But how? Who was it? I tried to tell myself it was nothing. Just a wrong number or a weird glitch, something that would fade as easily as it came. I didn't mention it to anyone. It was stupid, I thought. Overthinking. The next night, it happened again. The phone rang at 11:03 p.m., and I almost didn't pick it up. But I did. This time, the voice was different, as if it was coming through a different phone, a different place entirely. But the question was the same. Are you alone? I hung up before the voice could say anything else. My hands were shaking, my pulse quickening. I looked around the apartment, the familiar surroundings suddenly feeling foreign, too quiet, too still. It felt like I was being watched. And then I heard it. A soft knock at the door. My breath caught in my throat, and my first instinct was to ignore it. I stood stock still in the living room, staring at the door, trying to convince myself it was just a neighbor, maybe the mailman. But the knock came again. Soft, deliberate. I waited. And then, against every ounce of common sense telling me not to, I walked to the door. I didn't look through the peephole. I don't know why. Maybe I didn't want to know who was standing on the other side. Maybe part of me knew what was going to happen next. I opened the door. No one was there. But something was. A small envelope, plain white, tucked into the crack of the door. I stared at it for a moment, heart pounding, before I bent down and picked it up. It was sealed with wax. A deep red, like blood. My hands were trembling as I opened it. Inside, there was a single sheet of paper. Written on it, in precise, neat handwriting, were just 4 words. He is already here. I slammed the door shut, locked it, bolted it. I stood there for a moment, my back against the door, breathing hard. What the hell was going on? Was this some kind of joke? Was someone messing with me? But then I looked at the envelope again, and the words, those 4 words, they were burned into my mind. It was like I could still feel the weight of them, the intensity of them, even though I hadn't said them aloud. He is already here. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I stayed on the couch, eyes wide open, staring at the door, the windows, every shadow in the room. The silence felt thick, like it was pressing in on me. The apartment seemed so much smaller now, like the walls were closing in. I kept thinking about the voice, the knock, the envelope. Was this some kind of warning? By the time the sun came up, I thought I was just being paranoid. I thought I was overreacting. I forced myself to go back to work, tried to push the whole thing out of my mind. But it didn't work. The next evening, I came home to find the envelope on my doorstep again. I picked it up, just like the last time, but this time the handwriting was different. It read, "He is closer now, I went back inside, bolted the door again, and sat there, trembling. I called the police. Told them everything. The phone calls, the envelopes. They took me seriously, said they'd send someone to check the area, see if there was anything suspicious. But they didn't find anything. And then, last night, it happened again. Only this time, the envelope wasn't just on my doorstep. It was inside. Sitting on the couch, waiting for me. I stared at it for what felt like hours before I finally got the courage to open it. The note inside was simple, but it hit me like a punch to the stomach. He is with you now. I don't know who's doing this, or why. I don't know how they know. But I'm starting to think that maybe the voice wasn't wrong. Maybe I'm not alone. And maybe, I never was. I had always thought of my apartment as a sanctuary. After a long day at the law firm, there was nothing better than coming home to the quiet. I lived alone, never had much use for roommates or company. It was just me, a few bookshelves, some plants I mostly ignored, and a big comfortable couch. The walls were lined with pictures of family, but they'd become more like background noise, no longer serving as reminders of anything special. Just things I had. Things that were supposed to make the place feel more lived in. The first odd thing that happened was small, almost dismissible. One morning, I woke up and found a glass of water on my kitchen counter. I hadn't left a glass there the night before. I'm meticulous about these things. I remember the night before, I made sure everything was put away. The glass wasn't just any glass, either. It was the one I had gotten from my old job, the one with the cracked rim. I hadn't used it in ages. I shrugged it off. Maybe I had done it in my sleep, half-conscious, whatever. It wasn't a big deal. But then it happened again. The next morning, another glass of water, right where the first one had been. That's when I started to feel unsettled. I mentioned it to my friend Laura when we met for drinks. She laughed it off. Maybe it's just your sleepwalking, she said. I mean, you were a lawyer, stressful job, lots on your mind. You probably don't remember doing it. I hadn't thought about sleepwalking, but it made sense. I'd had a few late nights. So, I started setting my phone alarm to remind myself to check everything before bed. But the glasses kept appearing, always in the same spot, always filled with water. The third time it happened, I decided to leave a note to myself. I wrote, "Do not leave any glasses on the counter." And I left it on the kitchen table, clear as day, right where I would see it first thing when I woke up. That morning, the note was gone. It wasn't on the table. I checked the trash, the floor, the sink, nothing. And the glass? Right there, waiting for me, on the counter. Filled to the brim with water. That's when the pattern started to emerge. Little things, nothing major at first, but enough to make me question what was happening. A hairbrush I'd left on the bathroom counter would be in the middle of the floor when I got home. My jacket, folded up neatly on my couch when I left, would be draped across the armrest, as though someone had just taken it off. I tried to tell myself it was nothing. Maybe I was forgetting things. Maybe I was tired. But as days passed, the incidents grew. The hairbrush was joined by other things. A pen moved from my desk to the windowsill, my shoes from one side of the room to the other, my bedspread pulled tight even though I never made the bed before work. The worst part? There were no signs of anyone being here. No muddy footprints, no empty food wrappers, nothing that suggested someone had come into my apartment. It was as though these small changes were being made just for me to notice. I installed a security camera, one of those cheap ones that connects to your phone. I thought maybe that would give me peace of mind. I was convinced there had to be an explanation. Maybe someone was sneaking in when I wasn't home. I was wrong. The footage didn't show anything strange. It recorded as expected. Until one night. I was sitting in bed, scrolling through my phone, when I got the notification. The camera had detected motion. I opened the app, expecting to see a cat or maybe a shadow moving across the room. Instead, the footage showed nothing. Just the empty living room. But the timestamp was wrong. The recording was dated for a week earlier. I checked the other recordings. More weird timestamps, days that hadn't even happened yet. And then I saw something that made my heart freeze. Me. The footage showed me walking into the living room, sitting down on the couch, staring at the screen of my phone. But that wasn't possible. I had never been in the living room at that time. I was at the office. I was sure of it. The footage showed me, though, me, in my pajamas, just like I'd been that evening, but the time on the camera was hours before I'd even gotten home. I tried to tell myself I was going crazy, but I couldn't stop watching the videos. I was drawn to them, even though I knew they were wrong. The more I watched, the more unsettled I became. I was somewhere else. I could feel it in my stomach, like an itch I couldn't scratch. The next day, I had a small breakdown. I didn't go to work. I sat in my apartment, staring at the walls, trying to make sense of it all. I thought maybe I was losing it. Maybe my mind had finally snapped under the stress of my job. And then it happened. The last glass of water appeared. But it wasn't on the counter. It wasn't in the kitchen. It was sitting on the floor, in the exact middle of the living room, directly in front of my couch. I didn't move. I couldn't. I stared at it for a long time. Then I saw it. In the reflection of the glass, I could make out a shadow behind me. A shape. It wasn't my own. It was someone standing in my living room. I didn't want to turn around. I couldn't make myself. I sat there, frozen, waiting for whatever was behind me to show itself. But nothing happened. The glass stayed still. The shadow didn't move. Then, in the reflection, I saw something I hadn't expected. My own face, staring back at me. But it wasn't just me. It was someone else too. Someone who looked exactly like me, but different. Slightly wrong. The expression on my face was not mine. It was cold, empty. It smiled. I don't know how long I sat there. When I finally turned around, there was nothing in the room. No one behind me. But the glass was still there. That night, I packed a bag and left. I stayed at Laura's. I didn't tell her what was happening. I couldn't. But I never went back to that apartment. I didn't even take my things. The place is still sitting there, empty, waiting for someone to move in. And maybe someone will. But I won't. Because I know one thing for sure, something's still there. Something that looks like me. Something that's been waiting for me to come back. And it's not alone. It's never been alone. I've never been the kind of person who gets spooked easily. At least, that's what I always told myself. I grew up in a house that creaked and groaned at night, the kind of place where every room had its own sounds, settling floors, pipes rattling, the wind whistling through the windows. So when I moved into this apartment in the city, I didn't think I'd have any trouble adjusting. It was small but cozy, on the 5th floor of an old building that was, admittedly, a little run down, but I figured that just added to the character. The first week was uneventful. My neighbors were quiet, and the noise from the street outside wasn't bad. The apartment was solid, the kind of place that felt like it had been around long enough to get comfortable with its own imperfections. Then the tapping started. At first, it was easy to dismiss. Just a faint sound at night, like someone knocking on the wall in the next apartment over. I assumed it was nothing. Maybe the neighbor was doing some late night work or had a restless cat. It didn't bother me at first. But then the taps started to change. They grew rhythmic, like a pattern. Tap tap. Tap tap tap. Like someone was trying to get my attention. I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting for it to stop. But it never did. It would go on for hours sometimes, always at night. Sometimes it would be a soft, distant knock. Other times it felt like it was right next to my ear. The first time I actually got out of bed to check, I wasn't sure what I was looking for. I crept into the hallway, half expecting to see a cracked door or some kind of explanation. But everything was quiet. Too quiet. I walked down the hall, past the bathroom, and stood in front of the door to the other apartment on my floor. There was no one there. I figured I'd imagined it. Or maybe it was just some weird building noise I hadn't noticed before. But then it happened again, the next night, and the night after that. The tapping wasn't random anymore. It was intentional, like whoever, or whatever, was making it, wanted me to hear it. And then, one night, something changed. The taps turned into scratching. Like claws dragging down wood. It wasn't a rhythmic knock anymore. It was frantic, desperate. I bolted upright in bed, my heart pounding. I had to check. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I opened the door to the hallway and stepped out, trying to listen, trying to locate where the sound was coming from. It was coming from the other apartment, but it wasn't on the wall. It was coming from inside the floor. I knelt down, my fingers trembling as I pressed them to the wood, and the sound came again, closer now. A long, dragging scrape. I flinched, pulling my hand away, and quickly retreated back into my apartment, shutting the door behind me. My mind raced. What could it be? The building was old, sure, but this was different. It felt unnatural. I didn't sleep that night. I spent the next few hours pacing, listening to the sound of my own breathing, too scared to even close my eyes. The next morning, I went to the landlord's office and tried to explain what was happening. The look on his face was strange, sympathetic, but also like he knew exactly what I was talking about, as if he'd heard it all before. "Ah," he said, looking down at the desk for a moment, his fingers tapping on the surface. "The floorboards in that apartment are a bit unstable. They tend to creak and groan, especially at night. It's just the settling of the building." I wanted to believe it, but the sound I'd heard wasn't just settling. It was something else. That night, the tapping came again, but it wasn't the same pattern. It was slower, dragging, almost as if it were pacing, like something was moving underneath the floor. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed a flashlight and a screwdriver, determined to find out what was going on. I yanked up the rug in the middle of the living room, heart pounding in my chest. I began unscrewing the floorboards, my fingers slipping on the old wood. There was something underneath. I could feel it. I pried the last board up with a snap and shone my flashlight into the dark space beneath. At first, all I could see was dust. But then I noticed something else, something darker. A shape, shifting, just at the edge of the beam. It looked like a hand. I screamed and jumped back, dropping the flashlight. I scrambled to my feet, heart hammering, and rushed to the door. The sound of scratching followed me down the hallway, growing louder with every step. I didn't know what I had seen, but I knew it wasn't a person. I moved out the next day. I couldn't stay another night, couldn't keep pretending it was just my imagination. I left all my things behind, too afraid to even go back for them. The landlord called me a few days later, asking if I was okay. I told him I was fine. I told him the apartment wasn't for me, and that I'd found a new place. He didn't push me on, but I could hear the hesitation in his voice. "I'll have someone come by to clean up," he said, then paused. "Just, don't go into the floor. It's best you leave that alone." I asked him what he meant, but he didn't answer. I don't know what was under that floor. And I don't know who, or what, was tapping at the walls, or scratching beneath the floorboards. All I know is that I won't be going back to that building, not ever. And every time I hear a faint scratch in the middle of the night, I can't help but wonder if it's still waiting for someone to listen. I've never been the kind of person who believes in ghost stories, not really. I was raised in a practical family, people who would roll their eyes at the idea of spirits or hauntings. So, when I found a flyer on the bulletin board at the local coffee shop advertising an old house for rent, I didn't think much of it. The price was cheap, the location was quiet, and I needed a change. My old apartment had started to feel crowded. Not in a literal way. But you know, the kind of crowded that fills your head at night when you lie awake. The kind of crowded that weighs on your chest, makes you want to tear off your skin just to get away from it. The house itself was a short drive out of town, tucked between trees that looked too thick and too old, like they were holding secrets. But the rent was nearly half what I'd been paying for my cramped downtown apartment, and I was tired of the city. The constant noise, the constant movement. This house felt like it was offering me something quieter. Something safer. The landlord was an older woman named Mrs. Lyle. I met her the day I went to see the place, and the first thing I noticed about her was her eyes. They were too pale, too shiny, like she hadn't blinked in ages. She didn't smile much, but she didn't need to. She said everything I needed to hear in the way she spoke, slow and deliberate, as if weighing each word before letting it fall from her lips. "The house is old," she said, pausing like she was considering whether to say more. "But it's stable. Just don't disturb anything in the attic. Not unless you're sure you're ready." She didn't elaborate, but I didn't need her to. I just wanted the house. I had a mental image of it, cozy and secluded, the perfect place to settle down and shut out the noise of the world. The first night, I didn't notice anything strange. The house creaked, but it was just the wood settling. The floorboards in the kitchen groaned under my feet, but that was normal for an old house. I'd set up my things, made some coffee, and sat by the window watching the trees sway in the breeze. The sky was dark, clear, and still. The kind of night that felt like it could go on forever. But then, later, around midnight, I heard the tapping. It was faint at first, barely noticeable over the hum of the fridge. I thought it might be a tree branch, tapping against the window, so I got up to check. But nothing was out of place. No branches, no wind. Just silence. I went back to bed, but the tapping started again, this time louder. Steady. Like someone knocking on a door. I got up, half sleeping, and walked through the house, trying to pinpoint where the sound was coming from. It was coming from upstairs, from the attic. I stood at the foot of the stairs for a long moment, staring at the door that led up there. Mrs. Lyle had said not to disturb it. But what was the worst that could happen? I'd probably find an old box of junk or a loose floorboard. I opened the door slowly, the hinges creaking in protest. The air smelled musty, like stale dust and forgotten memories. The stairs groaned under my weight as I climbed, each step like a reminder that something had been left behind here, something that didn't belong in the house anymore. When I reached the top, the door to the attic was shut. I hesitated. The tapping had stopped, but now there was a low hum, a kind of murmuring sound, like a dozen whispers all happening at once. The air felt thick, like I was standing underwater. I pushed the door open. The attic was dark, even with the moonlight spilling in from the small, high window. I could make out the shapes of old furniture, dusty cardboard boxes stacked high, a few old chairs with faded upholstery. But what caught my eye wasn't the furniture. It was the mirror. It wasn't anything spectacular, just a plain, rectangular mirror with a thin gold frame. But it was out of place. It didn't belong with the other items in the attic. Everything else looked like it hadn't been touched in years, but this mirror, it was clean. Too clean. It reflected the moonlight like it was brand new. I approached it, feeling a strange unease creeping up my spine. I wasn't superstitious, but something about the mirror made my skin crawl. Maybe it was the way it seemed to watch me. I know that sounds insane, but that's exactly how it felt. The glass felt like it was pulling me in, like it wanted me to look closer. I reached out, my hand trembling, and touched the surface. The moment my fingers made contact, the whispers stopped. The air went completely still. And then, I heard a voice. It wasn't in my head. It was right there, behind me, low and cold, like it had been waiting for me. Don't look. I whipped around, heart pounding, but no one was there. Just the empty attic. I backed away from the mirror, my pulse racing. I didn't understand. The voice hadn't sounded like a warning. It had sounded like a command. I left the attic, locking the door behind me. I didn't even look at the mirror again. It was too much. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting, something tied to that mirror, that I wasn't meant to see. The next few days, I tried to ignore it. But the tapping came back, and now it wasn't just at night. It was during the day too. Sometimes it sounded like someone was knocking on the attic door, other times it was just that same low hum, like a distant conversation just out of earshot. I tried to keep busy, tried to settle into the house. I'd unpacked, made the place mine, but I couldn't escape that feeling. Like I was being watched. I started to avoid the attic. I didn't even go near the door. But I noticed something strange. The mirror. It wasn't always in the same place. At first, I thought it was my imagination. I could have sworn I'd left it against the wall in the corner of the attic, but now it was positioned at the foot of the stairs, like it was waiting for me. One night, unable to stand it anymore, I went back up. I told myself I was just being paranoid. I had to get over this fear. But when I stepped into the attic, the mirror was there, in front of me, just as I'd feared. I could see my reflection, but something wasn't right. My face was different. The eyes were too dark, too wide. The smile was wrong. It wasn't mine. Before I could look away, I heard that voice again. Closer this time. Come closer. I don't know how long I stood there, staring into that mirror. It was like I couldn't stop myself, couldn't pull away. Something about the reflection was drawing me in, pulling me deeper. My own reflection grinned back at me, but it wasn't me anymore. It was someone else. Someone who wasn't supposed to be there. I haven't left the house since. I'm writing this now, sitting in the attic, in front of the mirror, because I don't know what else to do. The knocking has stopped, but the whispers are louder now. They want me to come closer. They want me to look. And I think it's too late to leave. I think I've already been chosen. I used to be one of those people who never believed in the supernatural. Ghosts, curses, all of it. I scoffed at the idea of haunted houses, dismissed the stories as nothing more than people letting their imaginations run wild. But that was before I moved into the apartment on 14th Street. It wasn't my first choice, honestly. It was a bit cheaper than what I had been looking for, and the building was older, cracked walls, creaky floors, that sort of thing. But I was tired of searching, tired of looking at places I couldn't afford, and this one seemed decent enough. The landlord was nice, said the apartment had been vacant for a while, but that didn't bother me. I just needed a place to sleep. The first few nights were uneventful. The usual sounds you'd expect in an old building, pipes groaning, the occasional distant murmur of street traffic below. I had the top floor, so I didn't have to worry about noisy neighbors, and I liked that. I liked the peace. Then, on the fourth night, I started hearing the tapping. It wasn't loud at first, just a faint, rhythmic sound coming from above. I didn't think much of it at first, assuming it was just the building settling. Maybe the apartment above had a neighbor with a heavy footstep, or maybe it was the wind. But the tapping continued. Tap, tap, tap tap, tap, tap. It was the kind of sound you couldn't ignore, but I still tried to convince myself it was just nothing. That it was just the building creaking, the pipes, something that made sense. But after a few more nights, it became clear that this wasn't just the usual noises. There was something intentional about it. A rhythm, a pattern. Tap, tap, tap tap, tap, tap. I decided to go up and talk to the neighbors. Maybe they had a dog or were playing some game. I don't know, I just wanted an explanation that made sense. When I knocked, a woman answered the door. She looked tired, her face pale, eyes wide like she hadn't been sleeping. "Hi," I said, trying to sound casual. "I'm your neighbor downstairs. I was wondering if you could tell me if you hear that tapping sound at night?" She stared at me for a moment, like she didn't understand the question. Then, slowly, she nodded. "You hear it too?" she asked, almost in a whisper. I nodded, unsure of what to say. "Yeah, I was just wondering if you knew what it was." She paused again, glancing over her shoulder like she was checking if someone else was in the room with us. "You should leave," she said suddenly, her voice low and urgent. "You shouldn't be here. It's..." The words trailed off, and I could tell she wasn't going to explain. But something about her expression made my stomach tighten, like there was something more going on, something she wasn't telling me. "I'm sorry, what?" I asked, confused. She looked at me again, her eyes wide, filled with a kind of fear I couldn't understand. "The tapping. It's not just the pipes. You don't understand. It's been happening for years. The last person who heard it. They left. They left in the middle of the night, just like I did." I took a step back, suddenly feeling cold. "What happened to them?" Her eyes flickered toward the hallway behind her. "They're still here." I didn't know what she meant, but I didn't wait to find out. I just turned and left, walking back down to my apartment with my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't even look back. That night, the tapping was worse than ever. It came from above, but it wasn't just the same pattern anymore. Now it sounded like something was dragging across the floor, slow and deliberate, like it was searching for something. Or someone. I tried to ignore it, tried to drown it out with music, but it didn't help. The sound was inescapable, filling every corner of the room, making the walls seem like they were closing in on me. Tap. Drag. Tap tap. Drag. Tap. Drag. It felt like it was getting closer. I stood up, pacing, trying to decide what to do. I thought about leaving, but I wasn't ready to give up on the place yet. It wasn't a logical fear, it was a gut feeling, a primal unease that I couldn't shake. But then the doorbell rang. I froze. Who would be here at this hour? I opened the door. Nobody. But on the floor, there was an envelope, crumpled and stained. My name was scrawled on it in thick, uneven handwriting. I picked it up, my fingers trembling, and opened it. The paper inside was old, yellowed, and folded in half. I read the words, and as I did, my stomach twisted. "I am not alone. I can't leave. Neither can you." I dropped the note like it was burning my hands, stepping back as the apartment suddenly felt too small, too suffocating. The tapping above had stopped, but the silence that followed was worse. It was like the building itself was holding its breath. I tried to go to bed, but sleep wouldn't come. The room felt too heavy, like something was pressing in from every angle. That's when I saw it, the shadow. It wasn't on the wall. It was on the ceiling. Dark and shifting, like it was moving, crawling toward me. I stared at it, paralyzed, and that's when the tapping started again, right above my bed. Tap, tap, tap tap, tap. I grabbed my phone, dialing the landlord's number, but the line went dead before it even rang. I tried again. No dial tone. Just silence. I looked up at the ceiling. The shadow was closer now, closer than I could stand. And then the tapping stopped. The silence was unbearable. But the shadow didn't move. It just waited. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even dare look away from the ceiling. The next morning, I packed a bag and left. I didn't go back. I didn't even look at the apartment building as I walked past it. I heard it was torn down a few months later, some old structural issue or something. I didn't care. I just knew I wasn't ever going back. But sometimes, when I close my eyes at night, I still hear it. Tap, tap, tap tap, tap. and I wonder if it's waiting for me to come back. I used to believe in the good things. The small kindnesses people show to one another, the quiet moments that somehow felt significant. I worked as a barista in a small cafe on the corner of Main Street, a place I'd always loved to visit even before I started working there. It was cozy, dim lighting, mismatched chairs, soft jazz music playing in the background. The kind of place that felt like a refuge from the world. The regulars were a comfort. There was Tom, who came in every morning for a black coffee, Nina, a student who would spend hours sitting by the window with her textbooks, Mr. Carlson, the elderly man who always ordered a cappuccino, sat in the corner, and didn't speak much but always left a generous tip. People like that, you know, the familiar faces who make you feel like you're part of something, like you belong somewhere. I loved my job. But it all changed the day I met him. He came in during the late afternoon rush. A tall man with sharp features, wearing a weathered leather jacket and an expression that was hard to place. His eyes, dark and distant, scanned the cafe as though he was looking for something, or someone. He didn't say a word to anyone, just stood there for a moment, his gaze drifting from one table to the next, then to the counter where I was standing. "Coffee," he said, his voice low, almost gravelly. Not a greeting, just a statement. I nodded, reaching for the coffee pot. "What kind of coffee?" He didn't answer right away. His eyes lingered on me for a moment too long, like he was studying me, and something about it made me feel exposed, vulnerable. It was unsettling, but I ignored the feeling and repeated myself, trying to break the tension. "What kind of coffee?" He blinked, then his lips curled up into a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Black," he said, his voice flat. Like the night. I wasn't sure what to say to that, so I just poured him a cup, set it on the counter, and waited for him to leave. He didn't. Instead, he grabbed the cup and moved to a table in the back, the one near the window, and sat down, never taking his eyes off me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I tried to focus on the other customers. The cafe was busy, and I had a job to do. But every time I glanced over, he was still watching me. When the shift ended, I walked out the back door, the sound of the bell on the cafe door still ringing in my ears. I wasn't expecting him to be outside, but there he was, standing near the alley, leaning against the brick wall like he had all the time in the world. I froze. He raised his hand, not in a wave, but like he was acknowledging me, marking me somehow. Then he spoke, his voice carrying over the empty street, low but clear. "You'll see me again." I didn't know what to say. I could feel my heart thudding in my chest, and all I wanted to do was turn and run, but I stayed there, staring at him. I wanted to ask him what he meant, who he was, but instead, I just nodded and left, walking as fast as I could without breaking into a run. The next day, I found myself in the same position. He was there, at the cafe. Same spot by the window. Same unblinking stare. But this time, it was different. This time, he was waiting for me. "Coffee," he said again, and there was something in the way he said it, something that sent a chill down my spine. The same. I made him his coffee, but I didn't want to bring it to him. I didn't want to face him. I didn't want to be around him at all. But I couldn't avoid it. I had to. So, I walked to his table, trying to keep my hands from shaking. As I set the cup down, his fingers brushed mine. It was the briefest contact, but it felt like a jolt, like electricity shooting through my skin. "See you tonight," he whispered, his eyes never leaving mine. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about him, about his voice, his gaze, that damn smile that never reached his eyes. When I finally did fall asleep, I woke up with a start, my room cold and dark. I glanced at the clock, 3:17 a.m. The stillness in the air felt off. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. And then I heard it. A tapping. It was soft at first, like a light knock on wood. I sat up, straining to hear. It was coming from somewhere inside my apartment. I could tell it wasn't outside. It was close. Too close. I grabbed my phone, but there was no signal. The tapping came again, louder this time, almost rhythmic. I felt my breath catch in my throat. It wasn't just a knock, it was a pattern, like someone was testing the walls, knocking in different places. Like they were mapping the house out, figuring out where I was. I couldn't take it anymore. I got out of bed, grabbed a flashlight, and crept toward the sound. It was coming from the kitchen. I opened the door slowly, shining the light around. Nothing. The tap, tap, tap echoed from somewhere deeper in the apartment. I walked toward the living room. The light flickered. My breath hitched in my chest. I stepped forward, and as the light passed over the couch, I saw something, someone, sitting there. It was the man from the cafe. He was sitting on my couch, staring at me, his eyes wide and unblinking, like he'd been waiting for me. His mouth was twisted into that same small smile, but now it was different. Now, it was a grin, wide and stretched, like his face couldn't contain it. "See you tonight," he whispered again, his voice smooth and cold. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I just stood there, staring at him, feeling something crack inside me. And then the light went out. The apartment went completely dark, and when I turned the flashlight back on, he was gone. I ran. I ran out of the apartment and never looked back. I couldn't go back to that cafe, couldn't go back to the life I thought I knew. But no matter where I go, I know I'll see him again. Because he was right. He's always there, waiting for me, somewhere I can't escape. And no matter how far I run, his voice will follow. He'll see me again. It was supposed to be a simple weekend getaway. I needed a break, just a few days to get away from the noise of the city and reset. So, when I found an old cabin on the edge of a national forest, I jumped at the chance. The listing online made it sound perfect, isolated, quiet, and surrounded by nothing but trees. It was a good deal, too, which should have been my first warning. But I was desperate for peace, and a cabin in the woods seemed like the perfect remedy. I arrived late Friday afternoon, the sun just starting to dip behind the trees. The drive out had been longer than I expected, windy roads, a couple of detours, but I made it. The cabin sat a little ways off the main road, secluded and almost hidden by the thick woods. It looked exactly like the pictures, old, weathered, but charming. I thought it had character, in that rustic, cozy way. The keys were in the lockbox, and everything inside was just as advertised, simple but functional. I set my stuff down, grabbed a beer from the fridge, and stepped out onto the porch, looking out at the trees. The silence was unreal. There was no hum of traffic, no distant chatter, just stillness. I could feel myself unwinding already. I spent the rest of the evening by myself, cooking dinner, reading, and just enjoying the isolation. It felt nice. Peaceful. Then came the first sound. It started around 10:30 p.m. A low thud from somewhere in the woods. At first, I thought it was just a tree branch falling, or maybe an animal moving through the underbrush. But it came again, this time louder. Thud. Thud. A rhythmic pounding, like someone, or something, was knocking on a door. I chalked it up to the wind or maybe a large animal, a bear or something. I wasn't exactly sure what lived around here. But as the night wore on, the sounds didn't stop. They kept going, every few minutes. Thud. 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 Each time, the sound seemed closer, more deliberate. By midnight, I'd had enough. I grabbed a flashlight, stepped outside, and walked toward the trees. I could feel my heart beating faster as I walked deeper into the woods, each step taking me further from the cabin, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was out there. And then, just as I was about to turn around, I saw it. A shape in the distance. A figure, standing perfectly still, not moving a muscle. I froze, the beam of my flashlight bouncing off something pale, something human. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaking. "Is someone there?" The figure didn't respond. It didn't even acknowledge me. It just stood there, watching, still as stone. I felt my stomach drop. And then, suddenly, it was gone. Just gone. I stood there for a long time, trying to convince myself it was nothing, that I was just tired and imagining things. But when I finally turned back toward the cabin, the thudding started again. This time, it was closer. Louder. Thud. 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 I ran back inside, locked the door, and spent the rest of the night on the couch, staring out the window, my heart racing. I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the figure, about how it didn't move when I called out. The next day, I decided to shake it off. Maybe I'd just been spooked by the isolation, by the eeriness of the woods. So, I went for a hike, hoping to clear my head. The forest was beautiful in the daylight, vibrant green and full of life. Birds chirped, leaves rustled, and I tried to tell myself everything was fine. But as I walked deeper into the trees, the air started to feel wrong. Not cold, not oppressive, but empty. Like the forest was holding its breath. I stopped by a small creek to rest, taking a sip from my water bottle and scanning the trees. That's when I saw something, out of the corner of my eye, just on the edge of the forest. A figure. It was the same shape. Pale. Motionless. staring at me from between the trees. I squinted, trying to focus on it, but the moment I did, the figure vanished. I bolted back to the cabin, my heart pounding in my throat. My mind was racing, asking 1,000 questions. Was I imagining it? Was it just a trick of the light? But no. I knew what I'd seen. And now I knew something else, too. It was following me. That night, the thuds were back. But this time, they were inside the cabin. I sat up in bed, listening, my breath shallow. It started slow, just a faint tap, tap, tap on the walls. But then it escalated. A pounding, a violent hammering against the walls and ceiling, like something trying to break through. My whole body went cold. I scrambled out of bed, grabbed my phone, and called the police. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely dial. I kept the line open, the dispatcher's voice barely audible over the noise. "Please help me. Someone's outside," I managed to say, but the pounding drowned out my words. The dispatcher assured me help was on the way, but I knew they wouldn't get there in time. I could feel it now, whatever was out there, it was getting closer. I didn't know what else to do. So, I grabbed my stuff, ran outside, and jumped into my car. But when I started it up and looked in the rearview mirror, I froze. Standing at the edge of the driveway, directly behind my car, was the figure. Pale, unmoving. It wasn't watching me anymore. It was smiling. I slammed the car into reverse, tore down the gravel road, and didn't stop until I hit the main highway. My heart was still racing, the fear sharp in my chest. I didn't look back. I didn't even think about it. I haven't been back to that cabin. I don't plan to. And every time I drive through that stretch of road, every time I pass that forest, I can't help but wonder if it's still out there, waiting, watching. And maybe, just maybe, it's still following me. I've never been one to believe in fate or destiny, but after what happened to me, I can't help but wonder. It all started with a stupid decision. I'm not proud of it, but looking back, it was the kind of thing I might have done on a dare, had I been the type to take dares. But I wasn't. At least, I didn't think I was. It was a Friday night. A cold one, just starting to feel like winter. I was sitting in my car in the parking lot of an old shopping center, parked right under a flickering street lamp. The place was deserted, save for a few scattered cars. My phone was buzzing in my lap with text messages from my friend, Jessie, who was convinced I needed a little adventure in my life. "Come on, I dare you," her message read. "No one's around. Just walk through the old churchyard and back. It's harmless. What's the worst that could happen?" The old church was about 5 minutes away, hidden off a side street, its crumbling stones almost swallowed by the encroaching woods. It had been abandoned for years, and people used to tell stories about the place, stories about people going in and never coming out, about shadows that didn't belong to anyone, and doors that would creak open on their own. It was the kind of place that invited curiosity and dread in equal measure. I wasn't afraid. Or at least, I told myself I wasn't. I sent Jessie a quick reply. "Fine. I'll go. But you owe me." When I got there, the church looked even worse than I remembered. The windows were broken, some of the stone pillars had collapsed, and the heavy wooden door was slightly ajar, like it had been waiting for someone to push it open. I stood there for a while, just staring at the entrance. I wasn't sure what I was expecting. I didn't believe in ghosts. I didn't believe in anything other than what I could see, touch, and explain away. The door creaked as I pushed it open, a sound that made the hairs on my neck stand up for no reason at all. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of mold and old wood. The pews had long since rotted away, leaving only their rusted skeletons behind. The altar at the front of the room was barely recognizable, covered in dust and old cobwebs. I wasn't sure what I expected to find, but it certainly wasn't this. I stepped farther inside, the floorboards creaking beneath me. The darkness swallowed the room whole, even though the moonlight was streaming through the broken windows. It was like the night refused to let any light in. I walked deeper into the church, my steps slow, hesitant. I kept telling myself it was just an old building, just some abandoned relic of the past. There was nothing sinister here. And then I heard it. A soft sound, like footsteps. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. I waited, listening. The sound came again. This time, it was clearer. It wasn't the creaking of the building settling, it was something else. Someone else. I turned around, expecting to see someone standing behind me. But there was nothing. Only the oppressive darkness. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing off the cracked stone walls. But there was no response. I should have left right then. But instead, I took another step forward. I wasn't sure why. Maybe I thought it was my imagination, or maybe I just didn't want to back down. I don't know. But the deeper I went, the more the air seemed to press in on me. The weight of the silence grew heavier, and the darkness felt like it was reaching out, pulling me in. The next sound I heard wasn't footsteps. It was a whisper. A soft, indistinguishable murmur, like a voice just beyond the edge of hearing. My blood ran cold. I spun around again. "Who's there?" I demanded, but no one answered. I started to back away, toward the door, but my feet wouldn't move fast enough. It felt like the ground had grown thicker, heavier, like I was wading through something that wasn't just dirt or stone. Something that was alive. I reached the entrance and pulled at the door, but it wouldn't budge. My hand trembled on the handle. I pulled harder, but the door was stuck, as if it had fused with the frame. The whispering grew louder, now a low, insistent murmur that seemed to come from all around me. In the dim light, I saw something shift at the front of the church, something that shouldn't have been there. It was a figure, barely visible at first, blending with the shadows, but then it stepped forward. A man. He was tall, his outline hard to make out. His face was pale, his eyes too dark to see. His clothes were ragged, hanging off his frame like he hadn't moved in years. His lips parted, but no sound came from them. Instead, the whispers grew louder, more frantic. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But I couldn't. My body wouldn't move. It was like I was rooted to the spot, my breath shallow, my chest tight with fear. I couldn't look away. And then I realized something that made my heart drop into my stomach. The man wasn't walking toward me. He was coming from behind me. I turned slowly, and when I did, my blood ran cold. The altar at the front of the church had shifted. The shadows had twisted, grown thicker, and now the form of a woman was standing there, her long, dark hair hanging over her face. Her arms were stretched out, fingers reaching toward me. The whispers rose to a fever pitch, until I couldn't tell if they were coming from the man, the woman, or something else entirely. I could feel their presence closing in, suffocating me. I tried the door again. This time, it opened. I didn't even hesitate. I bolted out of the church, my heart pounding in my chest. But as I reached the street, something inside me stopped. I turned around, a horrible curiosity taking hold of me. The church stood there, silent and still, as if nothing had ever happened. The whispers were gone. But when I looked back at the street lamp, the one I had parked under when I first arrived, it was no longer flickering. It was on, bright and steady. And standing in the light, staring right at me from the other side of the street, was the man from the church. He wasn't just staring anymore. He was smiling. I didn't drive home that night. I couldn't. I kept the car running, staring at him from the rearview mirror, waiting for him to move. But he didn't. He just stood there, watching. When I finally got up the courage to look again, he was gone. But I'm sure of what I saw. And now, every night, I hear the whispering. Sometimes it's in my dreams, sometimes in my thoughts, but I always hear him. And I always see him, just beyond the light. Waiting. I don't know if I'm being followed or if I've just been marked. I don't know if it's real or if I'm going crazy. But I do know one thing. He's still out there. And one day, he's going to come for me. I've always been a fan of old things. Old books, old furniture, old houses, there's something comforting about them, something timeless. So when I found the little antique shop on Hawthorne Street, tucked between a bookstore and a cafe, I couldn't resist going inside. It had that familiar, dusty smell that instantly made me feel like I was home. The shop was small, but packed. Shelves lined the walls, each one overflowing with objects, vintage trinkets, tarnished silverware, porcelain dolls that seemed to watch you as you walked by. There was a cluttered beauty to it, like every piece had a story, even if you couldn't hear it. I was browsing for a while, running my fingers over old glass bottles and faded postcards, when I saw it, a picture frame. Simple, dark wood, nothing extravagant, but it was beautiful in its simplicity. And inside the frame, an old photograph. The picture was black and white, taken decades ago, maybe longer. A family portrait. 2 adults, a man and a woman, with 2 children standing in front of them. A boy and a girl, probably no older than 10 or 11. The setting looked old too, like something from the early 1900s. The man had a stern look on his face, and the woman, well, I don't know how to explain it, she looked distant. Almost empty. The children, though, they were smiling. Big, wide smiles, almost too big, like they were trying too hard. Something about the picture unsettled me. Not in a scary, supernatural way, but in a way that made my stomach tighten. It was just wrong. I couldn't put my finger on why, but I couldn't stop staring at it. I reached out, my fingers brushing the glass, when the shopkeeper appeared next to me. "Ah, you found it," she said, her voice soft but carrying a hint of something I couldn't quite place. I looked up at her. She was an older woman, hunched a little, with gray hair tied back in a loose bun. Her eyes were kind but sharp, like she could see through you. "This one's special," she added. "Not many people ask about it." I shifted uncomfortably, still staring at the picture. "What do you mean by special?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She gave a small smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "That family lived in a house not far from here. You've probably heard the stories. Strange things have happened there, over the years. People say the house doesn't like new owners." I raised an eyebrow. "What kind of strange things?" Her expression grew more serious, almost as if she'd said too much. "Not my place to tell the stories, but people have gone missing. Gone mad. The family in that picture, well, they're long gone, but some say they never really left." She paused. "There's something about the house. It changes things. People who live there often say they feel watched, as if someone's always behind them. No one ever stays for long." I took a step back from the frame, suddenly uncomfortable. It wasn't the first time I'd heard of a house like that, somewhere the walls hold onto secrets and the air feels wrong. But there was something about the way she said it that made my skin crawl. "How much is the picture?" I asked, trying to change the subject, not sure why I was still asking. But I couldn't look away from the photo. She smiled again, a little too wide. $50. It's a good price for something that's rare. I nodded. "I'll take it." The woman wrapped the picture for me, and I paid quickly, eager to leave. But as I walked out of the shop, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd made a mistake. I felt the weight of the photo in my bag like it was pulling at me, calling me back. That night, I hung the picture in my living room. It didn't fit with the rest of the room, but it felt right in a strange way, like it had always belonged there. I went to bed soon after, but sleep didn't come easily. I kept thinking about the photo, about the family. The way they smiled, but the woman's eyes. Something was wrong. I kept seeing their faces when I closed my eyes. And then came the whispers. At first, I thought it was just the wind, maybe something outside tapping against the window. But the whispers didn't stop. They were soft, barely audible, but there. Like they were coming from the corners of the room. I tried to ignore them, tried to convince myself I was just imagining things. But the whispers only got louder. They were murmuring in a language I didn't understand, words I couldn't quite catch. I woke up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, heart racing. The whispers were gone, but the air felt thick, heavy, like something was pressing in on me. I stared at the ceiling, willing myself to fall back asleep, but I couldn't. I felt them, the family from the picture, watching me. I could feel their eyes on the back of my neck, the weight of their gazes like fingers on my skin. The next day, I took the picture down. I couldn't explain why, but I knew I had to. I felt like if I didn't, something would happen. I shoved it into a closet, buried under a pile of old blankets. But that night, the whispers came again. They were louder this time. Closer. I could hear them in the hallway, in the corners of my room, but there was one voice that stood out, cutting through the others. It was low, guttural, almost like a growl. "I see you." I tried to get up, but I couldn't move. My body was frozen, my breath stuck in my throat. The whispers turned to laughter, sharp, disjointed, like a chorus of voices. The kind of laughter that makes your blood run cold. The next morning, I went to the closet to get the picture out of the way. But it wasn't there. The closet was empty. I searched the entire apartment, but the picture was gone. It was as if it had never been there in the first place. I didn't stay long after that. I packed up, left the apartment in the middle of the night, and never looked back. I don't know what happened to the picture, or what it was about that family that made them stay. But I know one thing for sure, I'm not the first person to take something from that antique shop. And I won't be the last. I hear the whispers sometimes, even now. Late at night, when the house is still, and there's nothing but silence. I don't think they'll ever stop. I've never considered myself a city person. I like the quiet, small towns, nature, wide open spaces. So, when I had the chance to take a job in a rural area, away from the noise and bustle, I jumped at it. The pay was decent, the town was charming, and I'd be able to live on my own for the first time in years. The place I rented was an old farmhouse just on the outskirts of town, surrounded by fields that stretched for miles in every direction. It was a little run down, but it had character. The kind of creaky wooden floors and faded wallpaper that felt like they had a story to tell. The rent was unbelievably cheap, and honestly, I didn't think too much about it. The house was empty, and it would be just me and the occasional deer in the field at the back. At first, everything was perfect. I spent my days working at the small diner downtown and my evenings walking through the fields or reading in front of the fireplace. The kind of peaceful solitude I'd always craved. But about a week into living there, I started noticing things. Little things. Oddities. The first was the kitchen light. It flickered, just enough to catch your attention, but never enough to seem like it was broken. You'd notice it when you were in the middle of cooking, or washing dishes. A subtle flicker, and then it would stop. I assumed it was just an old fixture, maybe a loose wire. I didn't worry about it too much. Then there was the smell. It was faint at first, like damp earth, or something musty. I'd wake up in the middle of the night and smell it, lingering in the air, but I could never pinpoint where it was coming from. The basement was dry, the windows were sealed tight, but there was always that odor, like something old and buried. One evening, while cleaning the floorboards in the living room, I found something strange. A small scrap of paper wedged between two planks. It wasn't much, just a folded piece, but when I opened it, the words were scrawled in uneven handwriting, barely legible. "They're always watching. Don't stay too long." I shrugged it off, thinking maybe it was left there by a previous tenant, a joke or a prank. But something about it made my skin prickle. The writing was frantic, like whoever had written it was in a hurry. I didn't know whether to laugh at it or feel creeped out. That night, I decided to ignore it. But the light flickered again, and the smell of damp earth seemed stronger. I was lying in bed when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of something moving in the hallway. I froze. It wasn't the house settling, like I'd hoped. It was the distinct sound of footsteps, soft, almost dragging, like someone was walking through the house. I held my breath, straining my ears. The sound moved slowly, methodically, as if someone was pacing the hall, just outside my door. I grabbed my phone, heart hammering in my chest. I couldn't even convince myself it was my imagination. Someone, or something, was in the house with me. The footsteps stopped just outside my room, and for a moment, there was silence. Then, the door handle began to turn. I didn't know what to do. My first instinct was to run, but where would I go? I was alone in the middle of nowhere. I couldn't even call for help, the nearest neighbor was miles away. But the door didn't open. The handle turned, rattling once, and then the footsteps retreated down the hall. I lay there, completely still, my breath shallow, trying to convince myself I hadn't just imagined it. The next day, I called the landlord, a gruff old man named Dale, who'd been kind enough to show me around the house when I moved in. He had a peculiar way about it, always looking over his shoulder, like he was afraid someone might be listening. "Everything all right at the house?" he asked, his voice low, like he was hiding something. I told him about the footsteps, about the strange smell, and the flickering light. He didn't seem particularly surprised. In fact, he almost seemed relieved that I was asking. "You might have heard some things," he said, pausing. "People have, over the years. The house has a history." "What kind of history?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. Dale hesitated. "I wouldn't go digging too much into it. There's some things that just aren't meant to be known." I could hear him shuffling on the other end of the line, like he was moving away from the phone. "But if you're hearing things, well, it's probably the previous owners. They left the house a mess. Never could get out fast enough, if you ask me." The line went quiet for a long moment. "Just be careful. Don't stay too long. The house doesn't like people who stay too long." I couldn't stop thinking about those words. The house doesn't like people who stay too long. What did that even mean? That night, I slept with the light on, even though I told myself it was silly. The smell of damp earth was stronger than ever, filling the entire house. I tried to ignore it, but it was suffocating, as if the very air had turned stale. At some point, in the middle of the night, I woke up to the sound of the footsteps again. But this time, they weren't just in the hallway. They were right outside my door. Slowly, they moved closer, closer until they stopped just inches from me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I was paralyzed with fear. Then, without warning, the door creaked open. But there was no one there. The room was empty. I stumbled out of bed, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. I checked the entire house, every room, every closet. Nothing. But when I walked past the mirror in the hallway, I saw it. There was a figure standing behind me, reflected in the glass. Tall, gaunt, with hollow eyes and a crooked smile. It was wearing old, tattered clothes that looked like they came from another century. I turned, but there was nothing behind me. The hallway was empty. The next morning, I packed my things and left. I didn't care about the job anymore. I didn't care about the house. I didn't care about the rent. I just wanted out. As I drove away, I looked back once, just to see the farmhouse in the distance. The fields were still, the windows dark. But for just a moment, I swore I saw something in one of the windows, someone standing there, watching. And then, as if on cue, the house seemed to settle into the earth, like it had exhaled a breath it had been holding for years. I never went back. And I don't think I ever will. I never liked being alone in the dark. Even as an adult, there was something about it that made my skin prickle and my mind race. I learned to ignore the creeping fear when I was younger, to push it down, but the older I got, the harder it became to ignore. It wasn't rational, I knew that. But when the house got quiet, when the last light was turned off, the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to stretch a little longer than they should, as if they were waiting for something. That's why I didn't think much of it when I first heard the noise. I'd been living alone in a small house in the outskirts of town for a few months. It was an older place, charming in its own way, but a little run down. The creaks of the wooden floorboards were constant, the draft from the old windows never quite letting me forget that the house wasn't as solid as it once had been. Still, I loved it. It was quiet, peaceful, a welcome change from the hustle of city life. But that night, something was different. It was around 11:30 p.m. I just finished up a late work call and was getting ready for bed. The house had fallen into its usual rhythm, distant hum of the refrigerator, the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. The kind of stillness that made you feel like you were the only one awake in the world. Then came the knock. It was soft at first, barely audible. Just a tap. I froze. My heart began to race for reasons I couldn't explain. I stood in the doorway of the kitchen, staring down the hallway. The knocking came again, louder this time. 3 distinct taps, then silence. I walked slowly toward the living room, my breath shallow, trying to reason with myself. It's nothing, I muttered. Just the house settling. But then the knocking came again. 3 taps. And this time, I heard something else. A voice, faint but clear. Let me in. I froze. My blood ran cold. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. The voice was soft, almost a whisper, but it was unmistakable. I turned and glanced around, my eyes darting from corner to corner. The house was empty. I was alone. The only sound was the echo of my own breath, loud and harsh in the quiet. But the voice had been real. I knew it had. I walked slowly to the front door, my mind racing. I didn't want to open it. I didn't want to see who was out there. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I had to. I had to know. I reached for the handle and stopped. There was no sound now. Nothing at all. It was as if everything had paused, holding its breath, waiting for me to make the next move. Don't, I whispered to myself, but my hand still turned the knob. The door creaked open, and I peered out into the night. Nothing. The porch was empty, the streetlights casting long, thin shadows across the sidewalk. The air was cold, still. There was no sign of anyone. I stepped out onto the porch, looking around. Nothing. The night was eerily quiet. The street, which had always felt calm and peaceful, now seemed unnaturally still. I pulled the door shut and locked it behind me, still shaking. I was about to turn and go back inside when I heard it again. The tapping. This time, it was louder, coming from the other side of the house, near the window. I walked toward the sound, my feet dragging, reluctant to get any closer. The tapping grew more insistent, louder with each step. As I reached the window, my heart pounded in my chest. I peered through the curtains. There, standing just beyond the glass, was a figure. A silhouette, indistinct in the dark. I couldn't make out any features, just the shape of a person standing motionless, staring at me. I couldn't see their eyes, but I could feel them, like they were boring into me. I took a step back, but the figure didn't move. It just stood there, unmoving, silent. I could feel the air around me growing heavier, like something was pressing down on me. And then, it moved. Not much. Just the slightest tilt of the head. A slow, deliberate motion that made my blood run cold. I staggered back, my breath catching in my throat. I needed to get away from the window. I needed to get away from the house, but my legs felt frozen, unwilling to cooperate. I turned and ran, sprinting to the back door. My mind was racing, my thoughts a blur. I had to get out of here. I had to leave. But as I fumbled for the door handle, I felt the familiar sense of dread creep back up my spine. Something was wrong. I was being watched. The door creaked open. I rushed inside, slamming it shut behind me, and leaned against it, panting. I glanced out the window that faced the backyard, hoping to see nothing. But there, standing just beyond the tree line, was the figure again. It wasn't even trying to hide anymore. It stood out in the open, framed by the moonlight, its shape more distinct now. The same silhouette. The same motionless stance. I felt my stomach twist. It was almost as if it was waiting for me to do something. Waiting for me to acknowledge it. I backed away from the window, but as I did, something caught my eye. It wasn't the figure anymore. It was my reflection. But the reflection wasn't me. It was someone else. Someone standing behind me, close enough that I could feel their breath on the back of my neck. I spun around, my heart racing. There was no one there. I stumbled back, almost falling over in panic, my eyes frantically scanning the empty room. But the reflection still stood there in the glass, waiting. I could see its faint outline behind me, not quite in sync with my movements. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. My mind was racing, and everything felt like it was closing in on me. I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking, and dialed the first number I could think of. Jessie. She'd been the one who told me to get this house. She had to know what was going on. It rang once. Twice. 3 times. Then, finally, a voice on the other end. Hello? Jessie, something's wrong. I don't know what's happening, but something's in the house. I can feel it. Please come over. There was silence on the other end, too long, just silence. Jessie? I asked again. Who's Jessie? The voice on the other end asked, its tone cold, flat. I froze. I didn't recognize the voice. I didn't know who was on the other side of the line. And then, the tapping started again.